And now live to the Senate Finance Committee's confirmation hearing for Robert Lighthizer to be U.S. Trade Representative. Mr. Lighthizer is an attorney who's also worked on Capitol Hill. This is live coverage on C-SPAN.
When I was in school, the cost of that for like a 501c, it's not too That's pretty nice. What is it, like an 80 or wow.
Again, we are waiting the start of the Senate Finance Committee confirmation hearing for Robert Lighthizer to be U.S. Trade Representative. Mr. Lighthizer is an attorney. He's worked on Capitol Hill. During the Reagan administration, he served as Deputy Trade Representative and he negotiated international steel and grain agreements. This hearing should start in just a moment.
No, I mean, what is money in? Right.
Last time I saw him. Okay. He looks great. Where's the darn gavel? That's okay. Appreciate you doing all right.
Yeah.
The committee will come to order. Welcome everyone to this afternoon's hearing. Today we will consider the nomination of Mr. Robert Lighthizer to be the United States Trade Representative. The last time this committee considered a nominee for USTR was in July of 2015. Unfortunately, under the last administration, failure to promptly nominate appointees to leadership positions at USTR became the norm. As a result, it is a sad truth that the Office of USTR has not had a fully confirmed bench of nominees since Ambassador Kirk resigned in January 2013. That's pathetic. The difficulty USTR had during the past 4 years in advancing an ambitious pro-growth trade agenda was in no small part due to the lack of leadership. As chairman of this committee, I hope that we will be able to change that starting today. All told, this committee must consider and report 6 positions at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Unfortunately, as with most of President Trump's nominees, we are off to a slow start. I hope that with today's hearing, we can begin the process of moving these trade nominees more quickly. Mr. Lighthizer is undisputably qualified to serve as USTR, and I believe he has a strong base of bipartisan support. If we keep this process focused on Mr. Lighthizer and the position he has been nominated to fill, there's no reason he should not be approved by this committee and confirmed by the Senate in short order. Unfortunately, there have been suggestions that extraneous issues that are entirely unrelated to Mr. Lighthizer, might be attached as conditions to the Senate's consideration of the nominee. Let me address this briefly before returning the discussion to the nominee's qualifications and the sizable agenda and challenges facing the new USTR, or the next USTR. Mr. Lighthizer has spent almost his entire career in public service, including as staff director for this committee and as deputy USTR and in private practice fighting against unfair imports. In 1995, Congress passed an amendment that prohibits an individual from serving as U.S. Trade Representative or Deputy U.S. Trade Representative if that person has, quote, directly represented, aided, or advised a foreign entity, unquote, in, quote, any trade negotiation or trade dispute with the United States, unquote. While in private practice, Mr. Lighthizer represented a small number of foreign clients in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Well before passage of the 1995 amendment. Because of this work, some of our Democratic colleagues have argued that Mr. Lighthizer requires a waiver to serve as USTR. Mr. Lighthizer does not believe that his work falls within this statute, nor do I. The Office of Legal Counsel at the Department of Justice has indicated that they share that opinion. So it's not at all clear that a waiver under the 1995 statute is necessary in Mr. Lighthizer's case. This is not the first time the committee has had to deal with this type of question. And in the past, we've always been able to work through it. In 1997, President Clinton nominated Deputy U.S. Trade Representative Barshevsky to serve as USTR. This committee was chaired by Senator Roth, and Chairman Roth and the Republican majority worked constructively to support President Clinton's nominee. Chairman Roth wasn't certain that this statute applied to Ms. Barshevsky, but he agreed to work with Senator Moynihan to consider a waiver so that Ambassador Barshevsky might assure her position, or assume her position as U.S. Trade Representative without controversy. As far as the record shows, there were no extraneous conditions attached to the waiver, and if passed on the floor by a vote of 98-2. Similarly, in 2007, President Bush nominated Deanna Tanner Oken for the position of Deputy U.S. Trade Representative. Although neither she nor the General Counsel at USTR believed that the statute covered her prior work, Chairman Baucus and Ranking Member Grassley worked in a bipartisan fashion to advance a waiver through this committee in order to ensure that all necessary bases were being covered. No extraneous conditions were demanded in exchange for approving the waiver, and it was approved by the committee by voice vote. Today, we are faced with very similar circumstances. Once again, it is not clear that the statute applies to Mr. Lighthizer's work in the 1980s and 1990s. In fact, we have what appears to be a well-researched opinion from OLC that it does not. Nevertheless, Democratic committee members are asserting with absolute certainty that Mr. Lighthizer needs a waiver in order to be confirmed. And at the same time, these same members are refusing to approve a waiver unless the committee also moves a piece of legislation that is entirely unrelated to Mr. Lighthizer or the office of USTR. Now, this kind of legislative hostage-taking certainly is not unheard of in the Senate, but in the context of consideration of a nominee for the office of U.S. Trade Representative, it is totally unprecedented. I have stated publicly that I'm willing to work with Ranking Member Wyden and others on the committee who believe a waiver is necessary. But I'll be honest, at this point, it appears that my colleagues' insistence on the waiver at the committee level has more to do with their demands for an unrelated ransom than any concern about the applicability of the statute. I hope I'm wrong about that. Let me be clear what is at stake here. By statute, the U.S. Trade Representative is the lead official for developing, coordinating, and implementing U.S. international trade policy, serving as the principal trade advisor to the President, leading international trade negotiations, and serving as the President's primary spokesperson on international trade. Moreover, the statute creating the position makes it clear that the trade representative is accountable not only to the President, but also to Congress. There's a lot of debate today about the direction of U.S. trade policy. In fact, the President is currently considering some of the most significant trade policy decisions in decades, including whether and how to upgrade the North American Free Trade Agreement, whether and how to launch additional trade negotiations with parties to the former Trans-Pacific Partnership, and whether and how to continue negotiations for a trade in services agreement, an environmental goods agreement, and an agreement with the European Union. And in doing so, and he is doing so without the advice of his chosen USTR, not because the nominee is unqualified, but because some Democratic senators see the nomination as an opportunity to advance a wholly unrelated legislative priority. Moreover, at a time when Congress is demanding greater input into trade policymaking and stronger enforcement, our principal liaison in the administration is being blocked from even assuming the office. And I don't think anybody has any real objections to Mr. Lighthizer. So it seems crazy to keep playing this game. Once again, this is unprecedented. It is time to move this nomination. Actually, to be blunt, it's well past time. It has been more than 50 days since Mr. Lighthizer was nominated by the President. This is the longest gap between nomination and committed consideration of a USTR since at least 2001. Before concluding, let me briefly touch on some trade priorities I expect the next USTR to address. It will not be surprising to many of you that I expect the nominee and this administration to be strong advocates for U.S. intellectual property rights. Intellectual property is the backbone of our economy. It affects large and small companies across America. It's a key part of our economic growth. In my home state of Utah, for example, 500,000 jobs and 67% of our exports are connected to intellectual property. It must be a higher priority. Second, I expect quick and effective use of Trade Promotion Authority, or TPA. President Trump benefits significantly by coming into office with TPA already in place. As a country, we have a unique opportunity to lock in strong trade agreements that meet the high standards of TPA But trade negotiations are long-term endeavors, and to be successful, we need to begin soon. As the administration updates existing agreements and negotiates new ones, I hope that they will be able to rebalance the Obama administration trade agreement template. In my view, President Obama continually sacrificed U.S. commercial interests at the negotiating table in favor of a liberal social agenda. Some of the areas that I believe need higher priority include the need to reflect a standard of protection for U.S. intellectual property rights similar to U.S. law, seek the elimination of price controls, work for better market access for our farmers and ranchers, including stronger provisions on sanitary and phytosanitary measures, include enforceable provisions ensuring greater transparency and accountability in government reimbursement regimes, negotiate strong and enforceable provisions on anti-corruption, provide greater protection for trade secrets, and include provisions that help strengthen good governance, transparency, the effective operation of legal regimes, and the rule of law. Finally, we must do a better job of holding our trading partners accountable. More effective monitoring of our trading partners' existing commitments, along with full implementation of these commitments, is critical to maintaining political support for a robust trade agenda here at home. Mr. Lighthizer, I want to commend you on a stellar career in international trade. It is my hope that you will use your expertise to advance a strong U.S. trade agenda that can help grow our economy and instill faith in the American people and the ability of international trade and trade agreements to provide new opportunities for working Americans. I look forward to hearing your testimony today. So with that, I'll turn to my friend, the ranking member, Senator Wyden, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman and colleagues, after several weeks during which the only insight the public has gotten into Trump trade policy has come in head-scratching 140-character bursts, today's hearing gives us a chance to get some specifics. I had a good conversation with Bob Lighthizer in the office, and I want to welcome him today as his nomination is considered. I hope that at the end of this hearing, Americans will have heard more detail about how the Trump administration plans to meet the extensive promises that were made in the 2016 campaign. Before digging into policy issues, there is another issue the committee has to address. As a legal matter, Mr. Lighthizer's previous work for foreign governments makes him ineligible to be appointed as the United States Trade Representative pursuant to the Lobbying Disclosure Act. The facts are clear, but as was the case with Secretary Mattis, this administration and others before it has worked with the Congress, when appropriate, to make exceptions. Speaking for Democrats, we are willing to work with Republicans to provide a statutory exception for Mr. Lighthizer, but we also insist that Republicans work with Democrats to provide a lifeline to America's hardworking miners who are now facing the possible loss of health care and retirement benefits. Mr. Lighthizer has an understanding about the impact of unfair trade on America's manufacturers and workers that, in my view, could be a valuable asset to the country. The country needs a USTR who's going to stand up for our rights on behalf of our workers and our businesses at the World Trade Organization, who's going to partner with the Customs and Border Protection Agency, the Department of Commerce, and the full range of agencies who are responsible for trade enforcement to crack down on the rip-off artists, the cheats who hurt our workers and our businesses here at home. After a campaign of shouting that the North American Free Trade Agreement could be the worst deal ever, the president came into office and said our trade relationship with Canada, a NAFTA member, only needed, in his words, tweaking. The president spent the campaign talking tough about China, but his administration has largely been quiet about their plans when it comes to China's flagrantly unfair trade practices. So when I say that our trade policy needs to deliver results and not just talk, that's why we need to get into specifics today. My own view is that the agenda has got to start, particularly in this season of March Madness, with a vigorous, full-court press for tough trade enforcement. In my view, there are two prongs to effective trade enforcement. The first is to fully enforce the trade laws here at home. Foreign subsidies and dumping that harms American workers has to be identified quickly and remedied, and that requires strong enforcement at the border by customs officials. Goods made with forced labor have to be barred from entering our country. Trade in stolen timber and other natural resources that damage the environment and edge out hardworking Americans in the forestry sector have to be stopped. And I particularly want to thank a whole host of my colleagues who are here today who pushed very hard for toughening our country's trade remedy laws, because now we're in a position to have trade remedy sanctions that are more responsive to our American producers who've been besieged by trade cheats. The second prong of effective trade enforcement is holding other countries to their commitments under deals that are already on the books. That means enforcing labor obligations, protecting the environment, or stopping countries from applying discriminatory policies that block out our digital goods and services. So when it comes to aggressive trade enforcement, the United States government can't deploy a full court press with only half a team. That is why a number of Senate Democrats have thought that the hiring freeze was so short-sighted, because it leaves resources on the sideline and it suggests that the tough talk on trade is not going to be much more than talk. So I hope that the forthcoming budget does not put more trade enforcers on the sidelines, because doing that would endanger good-paying American jobs just to fund a more than $50 billion giveaway to defense contractors. In order to maximize economic opportunities for our exporters, our trade policy cannot end with effective enforcement of existing rules. It also has to reach overseas to dismantle foreign trade barriers that prevent American goods and services from competing on a level playing field. Here's the stakes. 140 million people are joining the middle class every year, many of them in Asia. And the fact of the matter is that trade jobs in that part of the world provides us an opportunity to pay better wages. They reflect a higher level of productivity and value added. What we say, and I've heard many of my colleagues here say it, what we're doing is growing things here, we're making things here, we're adding value to them here, and then we ship them somewhere. These opportunities are missed if we stay on the sidelines while other nations negotiate trade deals that advantage their exporters over ours. This is especially true now in the Asia-Pacific region. And that's exactly what happens as we sit here this afternoon. As we sit here today, Pacific Rim countries meet in Chile to discuss trade in the region. And the question is, where is U.S. leadership? With that said, whether it's through renegotiating NAFTA, looking to Asia, or working on any other trade deal, transparency with the public and the Congress is essential. The previous Congress passed a law that requires critical actions to ensure that the public and its representatives in Congress are active partners in efforts to negotiate and implement future trade agreements. But with the American people sitting in the dark with respect to the specific actions the president intends to take on trade, the first months of this administration leave Mr. Lighthizer, if confirmed, with a steep hill to climb on transparency. It's critical that the American people know whether the president is advocating for trade policies to create red, white, and blue jobs, or very frankly, to help his own business interests. That's why I introduced, with a number of colleagues from both chambers of commerce, the Presidential Trade Transparency Act. And the bottom line is that the administration has talked mightily when it comes to trade, and so we have now reached the time for action. That means more transparency, a full court press on trade enforcement, and playing offense every single day in the tough global markets that we're facing. Mr. Lighthizer, I look forward to your testimony. I enjoyed our meeting, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Today, I'm being relieved of the duty to introduce our nominee, although I think very highly of him. Instead, we have two current Finance Committee members, both from the state of Ohio, who will introduce Mr. Lighthizer. However, before that, we will hear from a very distinguished friend and former chairman of this committee. I want to welcome my good friend, all of our good friend, former Finance Committee chairman and Senate Majority Leader, Senator Bob Dole. Good to see you today, Senator Dole. We're glad to have you here. Senator Dole.
Jiminy, maybe I'll take the job. I don't know. Well, 35 years ago, I was chairman of this committee when we passed the 1981 Reagan tax bill. And Bob Lighthizer was by my side, and I would say to my fellow Kansan, Ron Wyden, and of course Pat Roberts, if you need somebody who's aggressive and a bulldog, he's seated on my right. His name is Robert Lighthizer from the great state of Ohio, also the state of my great-grandfather, who was raised and was on a farm in Montpelier, Ohio. But I want to thank the committee for this hearing. I've had the honor a number of times of introducing people to various committees, and it's been bipartisan. I remember introducing Vice President Senator Mondale to be ambassador to Japan. And we both served on the Finance Committee, and we had different views, but we were friends. And it made a big difference. So I'm particularly honored today to introduce, he doesn't need any introduction, but to introduce someone I've worked with and someone I know. I've watched his children grow up, and I know him to be a man of complete honesty and integrity, and as I said, a bulldog when it comes to getting things done. Well, he made me look good. Hard to do, but he did it. Because of his work as director of this committee staff in the late 1880s and the early 90s. And we had great success on many difficult issues, and most of them, I would say 90%, were resolved in a bipartisan way. And Bob Lighthizer did not work for me. No one worked for me. They worked with me for the people of our respective states, and I'm certain that's the way you consider the outstanding members of your staff. But, you know, this is a singular honor for me. I'm older than the total age of all the committee. So I've been around a while. And I've listened to arguments and debates, and we have political parties, and certainly we have different views. Neither party has all the wisdom. But I think in this case, if you're looking for someone who really understands what he's about to enter into with your approval, It's a fellow named Robert Lighthizer. So I thank the committee for permitting me to be here and to say a good word about my friend and my staff director. And so I hope that I don't understand some of the problems raised, but they can all be resolved, because trade is important. I come from a farm state, Kansas, as Pat Roberts knows, and they're seated next to Grassley. And we all have, and I know all of you, I think most all of you, there are farmers in every state. I don't care what crop it is, whether it's vegetables or cotton or wheat. And we'd be lost without a strong advocate for agriculture trade. And Bob Lighthizer has listened to that speech for 40 years, I think, not quite 40. So he understands the importance, but it's not only agriculture, it's steel, which is important to the Ohio delegation, both on the committee here and other states, and whatever it is. Bob was a deputy USTR, as the chairman has pointed out. He was very successful, and many times when the trade representative was then Senator Bill Brock from Tennessee, Bob Lighthizer would attend cabinet meetings. And I've always felt that the trade rep was a little underrated when it came to the pecking order in the cabinet, because none of us can say we don't need trade in our states. What we need is someone, as Ron Wyden has pointed out and the chairman pointed out, who will hustle and get things done and work out the differences. And again, that's my friend, Bob Lighthizer. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Dole, and Mr. Lighthizer. You couldn't have a better person come and refer to you and support you than Senator Dole. We all love and respect him. We'll turn to Senator Brown now at this point, and then to Senator Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm not sure why Rob and I are doing this after the distinguished Senator Dole did such a good job of introducing you. So, Senator Dole, thank you so much. And it was a pleasure to get to hear about Montpelier, Ohio. And Rob and I were both hoping we would get to mention it first, that your great-grandfather was born in Montpelier. I appreciated the comments of the ranking member, and I want to take a moment before introducing Mr. Lighthizer to acknowledge the coal miners in my state and across the country on the verge of losing their health care and the retirement they earned over a lifetime of backbreaking work. What have we done about it in Washington? Pretty much nothing. Many of these miners were scheduled to be in this room today until the snowstorm hit. These are the people we work for. Right now, Congress is failing them. 2.5 months into this year, this committee has yet to hold so much as a hearing on this mine worker issue. I know it matters to Senator Portman and Senator Toomey and Senator Casey and Senator Warren. Senator Warner on this committee. These miners can't afford to wait. We must act sooner rather than later. Today, we're here to consider Robert Lighthizer's nomination to be United States Trade Rep. Mr. Lighthizer is eminently qualified, as Senator Dole said, for this job. He has a long history of fighting on behalf of American manufacturers and, I would add, American workers. Mr. Lighthizer is a native of my wife's hometown of Ashtabula, Ohio. Somehow Bob Dylan in a song rhymed Ashtabula and Honolulu. But Bob Dylan can do things like that, I guess. Mr. Lighthizer is familiar with the industrial heartland of America. He knows the steel industry, as Senator Dole said, inside and out. He understands how critical manufacturing is to our economy. He knows that for too long, failed trade policy hurt Ohio communities, left too many workers all over this country behind. I look forward to working with him to chart a new trade agenda that puts American workers first. In addition to his time as a staffer in this committee and the USTR, Mr. Lighthizer has represented the U.S. steel sector. He's defended American steel companies and their workers against unfair trade practices, and I considered it an honor to work with him on behalf of them over the years. He understands the kind of trade policy we need to not only help our steel companies, but all American manufacturers and their workers. Steel overcapacity must be a top priority in the USTR. We know China has the capacity to make about half the world's steel. It's something the administration has yet to address. I'm confident that Mr. Lighthizer will. Mr. Lighthizer is the man to do this job, to design a new trade policy that keeps President Trump's promises to American manufacturers and American workers. The issue of his waiver needs to be addressed. I hope this issue is resolved before the markup. As a fellow Ohioan, I'm honored to introduce Robert Lighthizer to this committee. Bob, thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Brown. Last but not least, as a witness, we'll call on Senator Portman, our distinguished colleague on this committee. So, Senator Portman, if you'll proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I too join my colleague Sherrod Brown in being very pleased to be introducing you, Bob, along with the Honorable Senator, Leader, Chairman Bob Dole. I thought it was particularly fitting that everybody in the room applauded Senator Dole when you said you thought USTRs were underrated.
Didn't say all.
I tried. You didn't say all of them. But as a former USTR, I'm delighted that Bob Lighthizer is willing to step up and take this job. And I know we'll have to work out something, it sounds like, but we need him. And I actually think the ranking member made some good points about the urgency of this task. And so I'm glad that you're willing to do it. I'm glad that we're here. You know, you're a guy, although you're a Floridian now, who does hail from the Buckeye State. And Ashtabula is one of those parts in Ohio that's been hit hard by unfair trade, and you stood up both in your roles in government and in the private sector. There are a lot of reasons that you'd be good. One is you bring the experience that is needed right now. So you've got the Hill experience, you've also got the experience at USTR, and the experience of working with the private sector on some of these tough trade issues. You're a Georgetown Law graduate, which we won't hold against you. And you launched yourself into quite a respectable private sector career. I know you were at a big law firm here when Senator Dole called up and said, hey, I'm looking for a young, bright conservative to come join me here in the Hill. You have been Deputy U.S. Trade Representative under Ronald Reagan and USTR Bill Brock, one of the great USTRs. He was underrated. And in that role, you know, you got the whole view, because at that time the deputies at USTR really had a broad panoply of responsibilities, were pure deputies. Now it's divided more in geographic areas. There's a separate deputy for agriculture and so on. But when you were there, you had to look at all the issues. I think that's great experience. You've been an advocate for balanced trade. The importance of trade exports was talked about today, and that trade expansion is critical to middle-class jobs in my home state of Ohio. 25% of our factory workers have export jobs. We want more of them. They're better paying, 18% on average more, good benefits. But you've also understood the importance of having balance. In other words, rigorously enforcing our trade laws and trade enforcement. And I think that's the right balance now. Your work, particularly on behalf of our steel workers, I think gives you that sensitivity to know that we've got the best workers in the world. We can compete, but it's got to be on that level playing field. And I think that experience is critically important right now. It's a difficult issue, trade. Lots of politics around it, and even around this committee, you know, looking who's here today, there's a different point of view represented by every seat here. And obviously it's an issue that came up during the campaign. It comes up in every campaign. There's a lot of misinformation out there, in my view, about trade. And again, someone who has experience and credibility in enforcing trade laws and stepping up for people like those steel workers you stepped up for, I think has some credibility to be able to promote the right kind of trade policy. I've also noticed that members of the new administration have some strong views on trade. Sometimes those views aren't always the same, I've noticed too. Frankly, I think in my view, they're going to benefit from having someone with your experience and your perspective to be able to help coordinate that effort and be a better bridge to Capitol Hill, because that's a critical part of this job. USTR was created by this committee and the Ways and Means Committee and by the Congress. And it has a unique relationship and responsibility to these committees, including being able to pass trade agreements. And I know you've negotiated a few yourself and have had to negotiate also, therefore, with Capitol Hill. So Bob is tenacious, he's creative, he's seasoned, he's knowledgeable, and I very much look forward to working with him as our next U.S. Trade Representative. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you, Senator. Welcome once again, Mr. Lighthizer. Before giving your opening statement, would you like to introduce any family members who are here with you today?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have my daughter and my brother here today.
Oh, great. We welcome them.
I would say when I was before this committee a long time ago to be Deputy USTR, my daughter was about 18 months old and spent part of the hearing sitting in my lap. She heard me sitting there and walked up and crawled into my lap.
Bob, could you yield?
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to excuse myself, but put your money on the Jayhawks.
Senator Dole, it's been a privilege to have you here, as always. So God bless you. It's been a blessing to have Senator Dole once again up here in the Senate. We all respect him. Mr. Lighthizer, you can proceed.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Wyden, members of the committee, it is a great honor for me to appear before you today as President Trump's nominee to be the United States Trade Representative. I'm particularly pleased to be in this hearing room where I have so many fond memories and to be here with my former boss. It is fair to say that I had my formation working for Senator Dole and this committee in the 1970s and 1980s. I was able to work for truly exemplary United States senators on matters of great importance. In addition to trade, I assisted on tax policy, Social Security reform, budget cuts, welfare bills, and much more. I would be remiss if, in addition to Senators Dole and Grassley, I didn't mention Senators Long and Moynihan, all truly great men. After I left here, I became Deputy United States Trade Representative. I worked for President Reagan and Senator Bill Brock, another wonderful boss. I have often thought how lucky I am to have such mentors and role models. While at USTR, I worked on agricultural issues, industrial issues, services, and trade policy. I negotiated several trade agreements. Yes, mostly they were bilateral. Those also were exciting times. For the last many years, I have practiced international trade law. The vast majority of my work has been representing U.S. manufacturing companies opposing unfair trade in this market and opposing the non-economic expansion of production capacity around the world. As many of you know, I have written and talked often about the challenges facing U.S. companies and workers and have espoused strong enforcement of our trade laws. I've also worked to preserve U.S. policies at the WTO and the OECD. I agree with President Trump that we should have an America First trade policy and that we can do better in negotiating our trade agreements and be stronger in enforcing our trade laws. I further believe we need an international trading system that functions the way it was negotiated, and that the United States must be ready to work with like-minded trading partners to ensure fair trade and to encourage market efficiency. If confirmed, I hope to work with this committee, the Ways and Means Committee, others in Congress, President Trump and those in the administration, and all stakeholders to develop and implement a policy that increases trade, grows the economy, and makes trade freer and fairer, but most importantly, that improves the economic well-being of our workers, farmers, ranchers, and businesses, large, medium, and small. If confirmed, I hope in the end to be judged by whether I aided all of you in accomplishing this goal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lighthizer. We appreciate your willingness to take on this really difficult assignment. Now, I have some obligatory questions that I ask of all nominees. First, is there anything that you are aware of in your background that might present a conflict of interest with the duties of the office to which you have been nominated?
There is not, Mr. Chairman.
Do you know of any reason, personal or otherwise, that would in any way prevent you from fully and honorably discharging the responsibilities of the office to which you have been nominated?
I do not, Mr. Chairman.
Do you agree without reservation to respond to any reasonable summons to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Congress if you are confirmed?
I do.
Okay. I'll just ask one other question. Finally, do you commit to provide a prompt response in writing to any questions addressed to you by any senator of this committee?
I do, sir.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Let me begin the questioning. In the 28 years USTR has published, published the Section 301 report, India has received the worst or second worst designation every year. Similarly, the U.S. Chamber's International IP Index has ranked India worst or second worst every year it has been published. Now, what can you do differently to secure real intellectual property rights protection in the country of India?
Mr. Chairman, let me say first of all that if I am confirmed, I promise a very robust protection for intellectual property rights. I realize this is very important to the chairman and the members of this committee. I think anything less stifles innovation and science and really compromises what is a competitive advantage of the United States, that is to say innovation, science. I think we need a policy that is as aggressive as we can have. There are a whole lot of areas where we are at risk in intellectual property protection, including with India. Slow and inefficient patent protection, theft of intellectual property, short patent protection, insufficient property protection. I expect to work with the committee any way I can with respect to India specifically. I would like the thoughts of the committee and the staff. I realize the importance of the issue, and I'm fully committed to protecting intellectual property rights.
Well, thank you. I remain disappointed that under the last administration, not a single intellectual property case was brought under the WTO or our bilateral trade agreements, despite well-documented examples of failures by a number of trading partners to live up to their commitments. If confirmed, will you commit to finally taking steps to not only identify, but effectively address these trade violations?
I absolutely will. I expect that we're going to have a very rigorous enforcement. I think enforcement policy. I expect to bring as many actions as are justified, both at the WTO and in our bilateral agreements. I mean, this will be a point of emphasis. I think the President asked me to do this job in part because of my enforcement background. And I expect to do it across the board.
Well, thank you. If it is well documented that Canada refuses to enforce intellectual property rights for the in-transit cargo destined for the United States. In fact, the USTR's most recent national trade estimate has documented this issue as well. Do we have your commitment to address this issue in your discussions with Canada, and will you ensure that other U.S. departments and agencies are made aware of the importance of the issue in their engagements with Canada, including the ongoing discussion between Canada and the Department of Homeland Security regarding cargo pre-inspection?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I'm totally committed. I really do believe that innovation is the central nervous system of the modern economy, and I am fully committed to bring every action that we can that we can, that's justified across the board. I will certainly make sure that other departments in this government realize how committed we are to this area.
Well, thank you. Senator Wood.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me start, if I could, with lumber and forestry. Mr. Lighthizer, as you know, and we talked about in the office, this has been the longest running battle since the Trojan War. It has gone on for decades and decades. The Canadians have subsidized their stumpage. They've used special procedures to force our trade agencies to weaken trade remedy orders on softwood lumber. I would like to hear specifically, and 25 senators, equally divided between Democrats and Republicans, have joined in efforts to get the executive branch to be serious about this. And I will tell you, I thought it was unfortunate that the president-elect missed an opportunity when Prime Minister Trudeau was here when he said, gee, all we need with Canada is a tweak. How are you going to get tough with Canada with respect to softwood lumber and finally ensure that our workers in these key industries that pay good wages get a fair shake?
Well, Senator, first of all, I would say that I've had a variety of issues with respect to Canada that has been raised by senators that I've gone around and spoken, and certainly this is at the top of the list, but there have been a variety of things. So I think there are a number of issues we have to address with respect to Canada.
I want to make sure I heard that right. Did you say this would be at the top of your list as it related to Canada?
That's what I did say.
I like that answer. Go ahead, please.
Right now, as you say, there's a long history of this. There's a long history of litigation and then memorandum of understanding and trying to work it out temporarily. It is a very serious kind of intractable sort of problem. It has enormous political consequences on both sides of the border. Right now, we're in the process of litigation, which is at the Department of Commerce, of course, not at USTR. But I expect to be involved. I expect to try to work out a solution. I know the basic parameters of it. I know that quantitative restraint is what the domestic industry wants and wants it in both parts of of Canada. I certainly will work with the senator and with his staff on that. I know the priority, I know the importance, and I know the history of it. And obviously, if this litigation goes forward, and if we have a negotiation, another negotiation on this subject, I don't want to prejudge whether the negotiation will come out. But I know in my mind that it's very important, and that the last agreement really did not work the way it was supposed to work, and that we have to have a new one, either litigation or a new agreement that does work.
Let me get in one other question. I'm going to be in rural Oregon this weekend having town hall meetings, and to be able to tell them that the person who's being considered for nominee as our trade representative has this at the top of the list makes a difference, and I appreciate it. Let me turn to the question of digital trade, because the internet sector alone accounts for more than 5 million American jobs. And here the challenge, and I think we touched on it in the office, is we've got to tackle these foreign efforts to require American companies to store data where governments want the data stored, not where it makes sense for the private economy, not where it makes sense for economic or technological reasons. I would like to hear your thoughts about how you're going to help this sector that accounts for 5 million American jobs get a fair shake in the digital arena overseas. As you know, this is cloud-based services, but it's a variety of other services. What are you going to do to make sure that digital trade, American digital trade, gets a fair shake in global markets?
Well, Senator, first of all, I'd like to commend you for your long-term commitment in this area. I talked about innovation being the central nervous system. One wise United States senator once referred to the internet as the shipping lane for 21st century goods and services. Does that sound remotely familiar?
I know that guy.
I say that by way of emphasizing how important I think this area is. I think there's been headway that's been made, and Ambassador Froman gets credit for that, and it's in terms of the negotiation, and you and your colleagues in terms of putting pressure on it. It is essential to moving forward that we have free flow of data and that you can store the data where it makes sense economically. So I'm fully committed. I expect to use trade agreements to pursue this goal and the WTO where appropriate. So I understand. I think it is very important, and it's the sort of thing that we have to include in our trade agreements. And when we talk about NAFTA and other agreements that need updating, this is something that didn't even exist when these agreements were first negotiated. So I really do think this is important. I commit to you that it will be something that we will prioritize.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Stabenow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Lighthizer. Welcome. I enjoyed very much our conversation in the office, and it's good to see you again. I look forward to seeing your waiver worked out on a bipartisan basis, and very appreciative of the work and comments you've made in the past. We've got some important issues on trade to address that affect our workers. We talked about Michigan and both making things and growing things, agriculture, manufacturing, all of our businesses. I have a saying as we talk about trade that we should export our products, not our jobs. And I think that's something that you would agree with. And so I appreciate that very much. I have to say, though, I think you have a very tough job. And I want to talk to you about that because as USTR, you're responsible for coordinating and monitoring and enforcing trade issues, existing trade agreements, future trade agreements. We in Michigan want a level playing field on trade from intellectual property rights, as the chairman talked about with China, or trade barriers with Japan, or currency manipulation, which you have spoken in the past extensively about. But here's where I am deeply concerned right now. You're out fighting for American workers and businesses if you are confirmed. But your future boss, President Trump, and his family have business interests all over the world. And my constituents and I are very worried about what happens when the interests of American workers and businesses in terms of enforcing our trade laws are put at odds with the business interests of our president or his family. I wondered if you might speak about how you stand up for American workers and businesses in that kind of a situation.
Well, thank you, Senator. First of all, in all my conversations with the president, and I've been honored to have several, he speaks very strongly on enforcement and getting the best possible deals for American workers and American farmers and ranchers. His own business interests are never remotely referred to. I really don't personally know what they are. The president is completely committed to the America First agenda, which I subscribe to and which I believe the senator subscribes to. So I am honored to have this president nominate me for this job, and I think that working together, all of us and President Trump, we have a reasonable likelihood that we can change the paradigm and have it be better for all of our workers and all of our farmers. And I've never seen any hint in any way of anything to the contrary. I think his motivations are absolutely spectacular.
Well, and I appreciate that very much. Here's my concern, and it's a very real, sincere concern. The president said on day one he would label China a currency manipulator. You've made very strong comments in the past. China engages in currency manipulation. China is by far our biggest trade problem. This is an issue that I've been working on for years, both with China and with Japan and other countries. We've seen the president say that the grand champion of currency manipulation is China. But then we see on February 24th, Secretary Mnuchin signals the White House is not sure what they're going to do on currency manipulation. But here's the concern that I have on that. Last week, China, after 12 years of court back and forth with Donald Trump and his family, has given provisional approval in an uncharacteristically swift manner to 38 new trademarks for the Donald J. Trump brand to be put on businesses, construction businesses, all kinds of businesses, all kinds of products in China. And we hear now that it's not clear what our administration is going to do about China. And so maybe it has nothing to do with each other, but it is very concerning to me that we would have, in my judgment, a need to be very tough on China and what they have done that we've lost close to 5 million jobs as a result of currency manipulation and related practices in our country, and a good number of those in my state of Michigan. And now we have a situation where the president is benefiting by business deals and new trademarks to put his name on businesses and products in China. How do you move forward on that? I mean, how do you make those calculations as to what to do? As you have said, and I appreciate very much and agree with the statements you have made in the past about China being a currency manipulator. So what do we do with this?
Well, Senator, first of all, in the past, it is my judgment that China was a substantial currency manipulator, and I think we've lost a lot of jobs in the United States because of it. And by the way, it's not just China. There are other countries that have done it,
I agree,
as you know well and have experienced with
yes.
through your constituents. Whether China is manipulating the currency right now to weaken it is another question. So that's up to the Treasury Secretary. So I
understand that. I guess my question is, as you move forward in a very tough job, and I believe you are equipped to do that, how do you handle the situation at this point in time where we have business interests in countries, the president, his family, with business interests in countries where we need to be tough on that country in order to protect American jobs?
Well, Senator, I don't know anything about the president's businesses or anything about trademarks or anything like that.
Would it help you if you did? I mean, in all sincerity, there are proposals, Senator Wyden has one that would require making that known. If you knew that, would it make it easier to be able to, from your perspective, you do your job and make sure there wasn't a conflict?
Absolutely not. I don't want to know anything about it. I think that to be honest, with the time I spent with the president, any suggestion at all that he would do anything that's not in the national interest, first, middle, and last, is just not correct. I would like, if I could, to have you and the ranking member, whatever things you have to worry about, and my job is tough, your job is tougher. To be honest, your job is tougher, your responsibility is greater. This idea that this president would do anything untoward is so far out of the realm of possibility. And I say this, and I mean it sincerely, it is an honor for me. This is a person who is completely committed to nothing but helping America and the American workers and farmers and ranchers. It's just...
And I know my time is up, and I respect and understand. I would just say he promised on day one that China would be a currency manipulator. It is after day one, and that has not happened yet, but other things affecting his business have, and that's deeply concerning to me.
Well, all right. Let me say, if I could just say, Mr. Chairman, I believe that if your concern is that the president would somehow not defend America against China because of trademarks, I want to let you be assured that that is not the case. And I would also say that I'll bet you and I will sit down in your office between now and the time I leave, and you will say, Bob, you were right. He really is going to change the paradigm on China. I believe he's going to change the paradigm on China. And if you look at our problems, China is right up there. So let me assure the senator, this is not going to be a problem.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Bob, for coming into my office and having a nice visit. Thank you for the work that you have done on this committee. Thank you for your good work in behalf of a Kansas legend, a national legend, Senator Dole. Last month, members of the Senate Finance Committee met with Mr. Peter DeMauro and Mr. Stephen Greenblatt. They are new members of the new White House Trade Council. They read to us the administration's marching orders for trade. They had 4 goals and 13 policy objectives. Since that meeting, the list has now grown to 24. On this list of goals, agriculture was listed as number 3. Given the rough patch that we are in today, given 16-year low in prices and other considerations, I believe it should be number 1. Mr. Chairman, before asking a question, I would like to submit the administration's list of 24 trade priorities for the record. I think you have the experience, you know this. Most trade agreements I've worked on since I have had the privilege of public service have been over-criticized and they've been oversold, somewhere in between while we try to work it out. But on this list of 24, there are several I could mention, but the one that really stuck out to me, country of origin labeling. That's a tough issue in the Ag Committee and in the agriculture issue list. But we've been down this road before. We fixed the issue of cool in 2015. We don't need to go down that road again. We narrowly escaped about $4 billion, somewhere between 3.5 and 4 billion in retaliatory tariffs against the United States. I do not think we need a constantly changing list of key elements of a model trade agreement. That may be a good thing to talk about if we had time to talk about it. We don't. What we need is a U.S. trade representative confirmed, that's you, and in place who will embark on a robust trade policy, that's you. You have the experience and you have the talent and you have the commitment. Now, the U.S. has withdrawn from TPP, and the President has expressed major concerns with NAFTA. The administration stated it plans to start to negotiate bilateral trade agreements that you referred to. It seems to me that we need to move very quickly. I want to make it very clear to you and to the administration, agriculture must be a key part of these conversations. When I met with you last January, you assured me that you would defend agriculture as trade problems arise. And I would like to remind you that I told you to just take it a step further, be the champion of agriculture from the start so we don't get into these problems. Now, last month, as chairman of the Ag Committee, Senator Stabenow and myself, chaired a field hearing. We had 21 witnesses. Everyone brought up the issue of trade. Last year, U.S. exported over $103 billion in agriculture goods. 2016, agriculture exports accounted for approximately 20% of the ag production. Agriculture had a global trade surplus of $20 billion. Understanding the importance that trade has on the agriculture industry and the rough patch we're in, will you be a champion for agriculture and get commodities moving on the global market?
Yes, Senator, I will. I have a long history with agriculture. I worked on it when I was at USTR. As the Senator knows, I negotiated the Reagan administration grain agreement with the Soviet Union in 1983. You'll all recall that President Carter cut off grain sales to the Soviet Union, and President Reagan decided to implement those sales, and I was called on to negotiate that agreement and did do it. My 30 or 40 year contact with Senator Dole is some indication, and I had a variety of very memorable meetings with senators, and it was a joy to go around and meet so many senators and talk to them about the issues that matter to them. But I had one very memorable comment that one senator made. which was, as you go through doing your job, remember that you don't eat steel. And that's something that stuck with me. So I assure you that we will prioritize steel. We will prioritize agriculture, both in terms of maintaining what we have and in terms of getting additional market access.
I can't imagine the senator actually stating that to you. I just can't imagine who that might be. We've got grain on the ground out in Kansas. If we don't sell agriculture commodities over the next several months, we are at a 16-year low in prices. We will have a problem on our hands. We all will have a problem on our hands. If you are confirmed, can you tell us right now what countries you'll be having conversations with to sell not only what our country makes, but also what we grow?
Well, I think that there are a variety of priorities in terms of what our negotiations are, but it's clear that agriculture would have been a beneficiary of TPP. And I think that as we move forward and negotiate new agreements, we have to go to those countries among others. And I would list, of course, Japan as being a primary target for a place where increased access for agriculture is important. It is hard for me to understand why we tolerate so many barriers to agriculture trade when America is the #1 producer of agriculture products. We are the best in the world, and if you believe really in trade and market efficiency, you just have to believe agriculture should be even more of a positive than it is, and it's market distortions that's keeping that from happening. So I think opening up more markets for agricultural sales is a very high priority for us.
I appreciate that. My time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Senator Menendez, Senator Cardin, who was here, has agreed to allow Senator Toomey, who has to leave, to question. Would you be willing to do that? Senator Toomey, then. Thank you. Thank you for your kindness. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the senators from Maryland and New Jersey for their kindness. I do appreciate that. Mr. Lighthizer, welcome and thank you. I enjoyed our chat earlier, and there's no question you have a terrific background for this job and a great deal of expertise and knowledge. I'd like to focus on, very briefly, on a couple of narrow, specific issues and then on a big macro issue that I think is important and I'm concerned about. The former is the two primary reasons that I was not able to support TPP in the form that it had. One was the lack of protection for intellectual property, especially of biologics. Incredibly important new field, an area where we need to get this right. And intellectual property is a form of property that shouldn't be stolen like any other kind of property. So I hope we'll do a better job in the future in that. And I would like you to add to your list of Canadian priorities. And that is, as I'm sure you know, the Canadians are very resistant to allowing American dairy products. And Pennsylvania is a big dairy producing state, and we could do quite well selling dairy products to Canada. So I just ask you to consider that on your list. The macro thing I would like to address is some worrisome signals that I perceive from the administration. I think Peter Navarro, who's the director of the National Trade Council, has been pretty clear that one of, if not the primary goal of trade policy is going to be to reduce trade deficits. Now, if you become the U.S. trade rep, of course, you'll be responsible for negotiating the deals that accomplish whatever these goals are. And I'm concerned that this is the wrong top priority. I'm concerned because I don't believe that trade deficits are inherently a serious problem. I think if you choose to address reducing deficits by expanding American exports, that's great. And I'm sure that will be one of your goals. We certainly want to tear down barriers to American products. The problem is we've also gotten very clear indication, at least from Mr. Navarro, that there will be an effort also to reduce imports, which is another way to reduce the size of the trade deficit. And I think that'd be a big mistake for several reasons. One, it would invite retaliation. It would almost certainly result in retaliation that would diminish American exports. And that would certainly be very bad for us. A second is, whatever mechanism one uses to reduce imports, whether it's quotas or tariffs or bureaucratic hurdles that foreign exporters can't get over, the net result is fewer choices for American consumers. Higher costs, fewer choices, fewer options. And finally, I would just stress that the fact is, historically, trade deficits do not harm manufacturing, broadly speaking, and they don't cause unemployment. I've got a chart here that illustrates this point, I think, pretty well. The red line is the line of U.S. manufacturing output, adjusted for inflation. And as you can see on the far right, the red line is back up to its all-time high, which is to say that the United States of America is manufacturing more today than we ever have in the history of the Republic. Now, we do it with fewer people, which is mostly a function of automation, but manufacturing is at an all-time record high. What's even more stunning, though, is that there's no correlation between a reduction in manufacturing and an increase in the trade deficit. In fact, it's the exact opposite. The blue line on this graph, as it descends from the upper left, the descent of that blue line reflects increasing deficits. And as you can see, it happens at the same time that manufacturing output is going up. And then when the blue line reverses and the deficit gets smaller as the blue line goes up, the red line of manufacturing output goes down. And so there's this pretty consistent inverse relationship, actually, between the size of our trade deficit and manufacturing output. I think it's probably because when the economy is strong, we're manufacturing more, and when the economy is strong, we're also buying more products. Second chart I want to show is a similar point with respect to unemployment. Again, you notice it's the exact same blue line. That's the trade deficit line again. The deficit getting larger as the line goes downward to the right. And as you can see, from the period from 1992 to, roughly the recession around 2001, as the trade deficit was growing, the unemployment rate was declining. And again, the relationship continues when the trade deficit has diminished, as it did significantly in 2009, unemployment went through the roof, and then once again, the unemployment rate has declined in recent years while the trade deficit was roughly level. So we've learned there's a way to reduce the trade deficit, have a recession, and you reduce the trade deficit. I know that's not what you want, and I know that you do want to increase our opportunities to export and sell our products overseas. I would just urge you to consider making the higher of the priorities, not the reduction in the deficit, but rather the mutual elimination of trade barriers, the expansion of trade, and certainly, of course, opening up foreign markets for our products.
Thank you, Senator. Your time is up. Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ambassador Lighthizer, congratulations on your nomination. Let me ask you, I am one who believes that we shouldn't compromise our values in order to get a trade agreement. If anything, we should be using those agreements to further our values internationally. As you may know, when this committee was debating trade promotion authority legislation 2 years ago, it passed my amendment that barred fast-track procedures for any trade agreement with a country on Tier 3 of the State Department's Trafficking in Persons report, a group of countries that failed to take any action to combat sex trafficking and forced labor. And that was a bipartisan vote on the amendment. Now, following that amendment, from my view, we saw an unprecedented politicalization of the TIP report, where countries were upgraded based on unrelated factors, one of those being trade, in my opinion, instead of their efforts to combat human trafficking. Can you commit to us that, if confirmed, you will not take any action to attempt to influence the Trafficking in Persons report?
Well, I would say, first of all, Senator, I obviously condemn human trafficking. I know that you've been involved with this. I know that Senator Cardin has also been involved with it. And I believe will be the strong policy of this administration, although it's not in my area, that it will be the strong policy of this administration to do what they can to stop human trafficking. In terms of what of what priorities I have in negotiating trade deals, I can guarantee that I will work with you and with Senator Cardin and other interested members of the committee to make sure that as we move forward, your specific views on this issue are reflected in the sorts of things
I
that
appreciate
do.
that. Let me, since my time is limited and I have several topics I wanted to, I have a very narrow question. Will you commit to the committee that you will not use your position as the U.S. Trade Ambassador to try to affect the Trafficking in Persons report?
I will make that commitment.
Okay, thank you. Do you believe that the administration will seek to negotiate trade agreements with a country currently or recently on Tier 3 of the TIP report?
I don't know the answer to that. I will be guided by the opinions of this committee and the Ways and Means Committee on what our, as well as the President, on what our targets are for negotiations.
Well, the reason I ask that question is because the law is clear. We're not supposed to be engaging with a country that's on Tier 3. So if there's an intention to do so, it would be in violation of the law, unless, again, the report is manipulated to allow a trade agreement to take place, even in the face of human trafficking going on in that country to the level of a Tier 3. So I would hope that that would not be the case. I know that the chairman raised India with you, and I want to echo his concerns. I think it's a great opportunity for us to build greater economic ties with India, but I have a real problem with their lack of protection of intellectual property rights. And for the United States, that's a critical element, whether in the technology field or in my home state of New Jersey, which is the medicine cabinet to the world in terms of a growing biotech and pharmaceutical industry. So in that regard, on multiple occasions, I have raised the issue of ensuring regulatory protection of biologics in our trade agreements. The Trade Promotion Authority requires U.S. trade negotiators to ensure, quote, that the provisions of any trade agreement governing intellectual property rights reflect a standard of protection similar to that found in the United States under U.S. law. Such a level of protection enjoys strong bipartisan support from Congress, as our highly innovative biopharmaceutical industry, as well as the broader higher tech industry, supports millions of high-quality jobs, including hundreds of thousands in my state of New Jersey. Will you ensure that any U.S. free trade agreements meet this Trade Promotion Authority requirement, raising global standards to those of the United States?
That certainly is I'm familiar with the issue, and that certainly is my position. I'll do everything I can to have new trade agreements reflect that standard, that objective.
I appreciate that answer. And given that the U.S. law provides for 12 years of data protection for biologics, would you commit to pursuing an equivalent level of protection in future trade agreements?
I've had conversations with several members. I know that there's a split on this, and I'm certainly with the chairman on this issue, which is to say, yes, that would be my objective.
And I would just simply say that that's, in my view, that's in line with what Trade Promotion Authority says under the law to bring it up to a standard under U.S. law, which is 12 years. So thank you for your answers.
Okay, I think, let me just see here. I think it's Senator Cardin next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lighthizer, welcome. Mr. Chairman, I've known Mr. Lighthizer for a long period of time. I have a great deal of confidence in his ability to negotiate and to stand up for enforcement of American trade laws. So I thank you for your willingness to take on this extremely important public service. I know it's a sacrifice, and we thank you very much for being willing to do this. I will comment that we do need a strong USTR to enforce our anti-dumping and to deal with illegal subsidies. And although you can't eat steel, it does provide good jobs. And if we had more steel jobs, our entire economy would be stronger, including the agricultural sector. So I thank you for your efforts on behalf of American steel, and I hope that you'll use that talent to deal with a fair trading system for all of Americans, producers and manufacturers and farmers. I would also point out in that regard, and I say one other thing, if I might, Mr. Chairman, on a personal basis, Bob's brother, Jim, is here, and Jim Lighthizer was a distinguished public servant in Maryland, held the office of county exec of Anne Arundel County, one of our largest counties. So it's a family of public service, and it's wonderful to see his family members here.
We certainly welcome the family, every member.
As Senator Portman pointed out, the USTR and our trade laws are a delegation by Congress to your office. And we express ourselves through TPA, and we announce several principal negotiating objectives. And we expect the USTR to comply with the delegation and the objectives given to you by Congress. So let me go over a couple of those. In the most recent Trade Promotional Authority bill, we put as a principal negotiating objective compliance with anti-corruption commitments. Of course, we were negotiating TPP. We were dealing with countries that are not democratic countries, and we were very concerned about good governance and anti-corruption. We've now seen a spread of corruption among many countries in the world. Do you commit to carry out the Trade Promotional Authority direction that in trade agreements that will carry out anti-corruption commitments within the trade agreement? Thank you. We also passed in the Trade Promotional Authority an amendment that was offered by Senator Portman and me as it relates to our European partners. It's called the anti-BDS provisions, which requires the trade representative to get commitments from our trading partners in Europe that they will not sponsor any boycott, divestment, or sanction efforts against the State of Israel. Do you also commit that you will comply with that principal negotiating objective that was included in the Congressional Act?
Absolutely, Senator.
Thank you for that. Third, and this has been commented on by many of us, and there's now currently an effort to try to change our tax codes so that we can get a border adjustment, which would be fairer to American manufacturers. And we've always included in our Trade Promotional Authority an effort by the USTR to get border adjustment comparable to what our trading partners have on products that enter their market, on our products entering their market. The difficulty, of course, is that we have not harmonized with the international community in the use of a consumption tax. I've introduced a progressive consumption tax that is patterned after what is accepted internationally as a border-adjusted tax. It's difficult to see us winning too many cases in the WTO with something that is an income tax that we call a consumption tax. So I just urge you in your position to give a realistic assessment to those of us in Congress as to what is likely to be border adjusted, so that at long last we can try to set up a level playing field for American manufacturers and producers in the international marketplace as it relates to tax burdens.
Right, thank you, Senator. Yeah, I have spent a lot of time on this issue over the years. I was involved in DISC and FISC and all these things at various times. I don't know what the right answer is, but it is a problem in my judgment, this disequilibrium between direct and indirect taxes. I don't view it as having any real economic or legal basis. I think it's sort of serendipitous and unfortunate from the point of view of the United States, so I would look forward to working with.
I appreciate that. Last point I would make, Mr. Chairman, is that we don't do so well in the World Trade Organization on a lot of these legal cases. We haven't done well on border adjustment with the manufacturing credit that you refer to. And I don't know how well we could do on the tax proposal we're talking about. I do know, though, on enforcing our anti-dumping laws, it would be very helpful in the bilateral agreements. We had specific references to enforcement of U.S. law in that bilateral rather than relying on a case within the WTO. So I would just encourage you, as you do these trade agreements, knowing your reputation for enforcement, that we include enforcement sections in these bilateral agreements.
I agree completely with you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Grassley.
Sorry I missed your opening statement because I had to go to the floor to speak about the Supreme Court Justice hearing we're having next week. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I'm glad that we're moving forward with Mr. Lighthizer's nomination. Lighthizer, I'm sorry. we need to get in place at the USTR because it's a very important job and a lot of negotiations coming up. I've enjoyed working with this agency over the years and respect their unmatched expertise on trade issues. And as everyone on this committee knows, Congress set negotiating objectives for trade agreements when we passed TPA 2015. And it's a very important piece of legislation for getting our trade agreements through the Congress. So I have just a few questions, and I was told that Senator Roberts touched on part of what I was going to ask. So with your many years of experience in trade, I have no doubt that you appreciate the requirements in TPA to keep Congress informed on negotiations and the need for agreements to meet negotiating objectives set by Congress that enable agreements negotiated by this administration to receive a single up or down vote. Now, following on what Senator Roberts asked you, as you know, I represent a state that has tremendous agricultural productions. Exports are extremely important to Iowa agriculture, whether it be corn, soybeans, cattle, or hogs. The equivalent of 1 out of every 3 rows of soybeans, as an example, will end up being exported to China alone. Clearly, these exports are very important to the price of commodities. President Trump and others in his administration have indicated a desire to modernize and update NAFTA. I'm not opposed to that on the surface, but I do have concerns about potential outcomes. Mexico is the #1 market for U.S. corn and soybean meal. Mexico and Canada represent the #2 and 3 markets, respectively, for U.S. beef, and finally, pork exports to Mexico are 12 times larger today than when NAFTA was implemented. Could you assure the committee that you and President Trump's administration fully understand what is at stake for U.S. agriculture in renegotiating NAFTA?
I do, Senator, yes.
I can't stress enough that there will be real and immediate economic consequences for farmers if we lose exports, and probably want to emphasize that when we're retaliated against, often it's done through their countries taking action against our exports of agriculture. Second question, the administration has indicated it prefers bilateral negotiations for free trade agreements. Will President Trump's administration be approaching NAFTA modernization as 2 new bilateral agreements, or an update of NAFTA, which is by definition a trilateral agreement?
I don't think that decision has been made at this point, Senator. The administration has not made a decision whether to update it as a trilateral agreement or to make it 2 bilateral agreements. So we just don't have a position on that.
Okay. And I noticed in your testimony that you spent time representing U.S. manufacturing, opposing non-economic expansion of production capacity around the world, and I've heard a great deal from the U.S. steel industry about China's extreme overcapacity for steel production. What do you think is the most effective way that the United States can deal with problems like excess production capacity in any country, but particularly China?
Well, Senator, this is a very difficult and sort of intractable problem, and it goes beyond steel, right? It's a model that the Chinese use in a lot of different industries. And to me, the answer is, one, you have to engage bilaterally and multilaterally wherever you are. And there are a variety of fora where you can engage with the Chinese and try to specifically encourage them to reduce this non-economic capacity, this sort of state encouraged capacity. I think there are several fora which we can talk about where that's appropriate and where progress can be made. Then the next thing is you want to make it less economic. Seems to me that's ultimately what it has to come down. It has to be more difficult for them to maintain non-economic capacity, and that means enforcing our trade laws. To me, it means encouraging other countries where they could ship product to enforce their trade laws, and then to try to think of more imaginative solutions. The WTO and other places where you can actually bring litigation. But this is the overall theme to me has to be if a country is creating capacity, and it's not, as I say, it could be aluminum, it could be semiconductors, it could be a lot of things through their industrial policy. We have to take it on head on and go in every direction we can to keep them, to make it more and more expensive to keep non-economic capacity, which is having this negative effect on the global economy.
Thank you, and congratulations on your appointment.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, let's see who's next here. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, Ambassador. Just to continue on the same vein that you heard from Senator Grassley as it relates to overcapacity will be a part of my question specifically as we think about issues of aluminum, steel, and other issues. But thank you for coming by the office and spending some time. I think we had a good conversation about the value of trade and exporting to the South Carolina economy. We've done a really good job of becoming the home of over 6,000 companies who depend largely on exporting. We have about I think it's $2.3 trillion of value goes through our port. About 500,000 jobs in South Carolina are connected to the port, so about 1 out of every 7 jobs are connected to the port. So it's incredibly important that we continue the conversation that we had around new trade opportunities for our folks in South Carolina. But specifically, one of the challenges that we see at home is this conversation around overcapacity and how we deal with it. Specifically, the aluminum and the steel markets are, it's suggested that there's an overcapacity because of folks who just aren't playing by the rules. How would you continue the conversation that you started with Grassley on how we specifically deal with that issue?
Well, yeah, thank you, Senator. And I also enjoyed our conversation and look forward to working with you if I'm confirmed on this and the other issues that you raised, because you raised a variety of issues that were very thoughtful. To me, the key is to go into, in the case of steel, we have an actual something called the Global Forum where you can actually sit down with the Chinese and talk about reducing capacity in the steel industry. You also have other places where you interact with them. Enforcing our trade laws, getting other people to enforce their trade laws so that they can't ship uneconomic capacity. I think we have to worry and see if there's some way we can affect what's called sort of upstream dumping or third-party dumping, where they're actually taking non-economic capacity, putting it into another product, and then shipping that product to us. A good example would be steel, where they.
If you look at the tools at your disposal, if you found the WTO to be ineffective, are there other tools that you need that you would recommend if you are confirmed as our trade rep?
I have some ideas, but they're probably ideas that I'm better off
holding on to,
talking to you and talking to the staff. It is a very, very serious problem for our economy.
Yes.
And I don't believe that the WTO is set up to deal effectively with a country like China and their industrial policy. I just feel it was never really intended to deal with those kind of situations. We have to use the tools we have, and then I think we have to sit down with members and find a responsible way to deal with the problem, probably creating some new tools.
Excellent. I look forward to having that conversation perhaps after your confirmation. I know that Senator Wyden mentioned the importance of soft lumber to the state. It's also very important in the South. I think we are responsible for almost 1 out of every 4 parts of that trade opportunity. Specifically, there's been some conversation about our position where there is a free trade agreement. Some suggest that we have a surplus, others say that we do not. What's your position on that?
With respect to a surplus with...
where we have a free trade agreement in place.
If you analyze the sort of trade deficit situation with free trade agreements, you have maybe 3 categories, I would say. You have surpluses with Canada, Australia, and Singapore. And then you have a bunch of countries where it kind of goes up and down and numbers aren't very large. And then you have Mexico and Korea. And those two are large deficit countries. So it kind of varies. With respect to some, it's on that basis been effective. On request to others, it's been less effective. To me, when I look at deficits, I try to ask myself, what does it tell me about the rules of trade as they pertain to that country? Because our objective is not just to get the trade deficit down. Our objective is to get more efficiency in the market, is to get rid of trade barriers everywhere. Everybody wins, and the United States producers really win to the extent we can break down trade barriers. So when I look at FTA deficits, I try to put it into categories, and I see what can I learn from this agreement versus that agreement. And in some cases, the rules don't seem to be working as well as with others, and that's where I try to learn on that.
I think my time is about up, but perhaps my last question will be, if you look at the TPP countries, I know that the administration has been very clear on staying away from multilateral agreements. Perhaps we are in a better position to go forward with bilateral agreements. Would you envision our country taking a lead in looking for ways to have bilateral agreements with some of the partners that would have been a part of the TPP?
Absolutely, Senator. That certainly is my view. I believe it's the view of the administration. Yeah. Clearly, we want to have a series of bilateral agreements, and hopefully ones that take TPP and improve upon what was negotiated, in some cases very well, by Ambassador Froman.
I think it would be certainly an important signal to South Carolina and the many companies that depend on opportunities to continue trade. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you. Senator Brown and Carper have allowed Senator Casey to go next.
I changed my mind.
I should have said Carper and Brown. I apologize.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I owe both Senators Brown and Carper something. I don't know what it is, but I'm grateful that they did that. I wanted to just preliminarily make a statement about the miners' protection, the miners' health care and pension legislation. We know now that we got coal miners across the country, including many in Pennsylvania, that might be suffering from black lung or cancer or diabetes. They began receiving notices on March the 1st that their health care would be terminated. And in Pennsylvania, that's almost 2,000 miners. These miners kept their promise, every promise they've ever made, to their country, to their family, to their companies. It's time the federal government keeps its promise. What we're saying on this side of the aisle to Republicans is just get this Miners Protection Act done. And that, of course, involves, in this case, from our point of view, making sure that we can get it done now. And that would also, of course, move forward Mr. Lighthizer's nomination, which I think there's broad support for. Coal miners and their families don't need to spend any additional time, in this case, months after month, with the fear and the uncertainty of not having health care or the pensions that they earn. So we just hope that the committee, as well as Majority Leader McConnell and the President, will join us in this effort to get both done. Mr. Lighthizer, I'm grateful that you're willing to put yourself forward for service again. We had a good discussion in my office a couple weeks ago, and we're grateful for that discussion. Just one preliminary question with regard to enforcement. If you're confirmed, will you work to enforce both labor and environmental obligations of trading partners as vigorously as any other obligation?
Yes, I will, Senator.
I appreciate that. Wanted to spend the remainder of my time on China. Despite promises from China in their WTO ascension, China continues to exercise significant control over both their state-owned enterprises and factors of production. This has traditionally been executed through state subsidization of both manufacturing and exports, like steel and aluminum, rather than curbing these activities in response to trade cases. China has expanded their reach through new practices that run counter to market principles. For example, hacking or cyber-enabled economic espionage. The cyber theft of intellectual property and trade secrets can have a significant impact on both U.S. innovators and manufacturers. Now, China, of course, wants market economy status at the WTO. Both administrations have not agreed to that. This administration, we're told, has said that it will continue the stance of the prior administration. I'm concerned, however, that allies of ours, like those in the EU, may amend their past position on market economy. So 2 questions. One is, will you work with the EU and other allies to defend the view that China is a non-market economy?
Absolutely, Senator. I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, and I completely agree with you.
I appreciate that. And also, what other areas do you think you'll be able to work with the EU on with regard to curbing the impact of China's market-distorting practices?
Well, I think we have to engage across the board with the EU. They're a potential ally on a whole variety of areas, particularly in the anti-dumping and countervailing duty area. So I hope to, if confirmed, spend a good deal of time with Europe and with the EU and to enlist them in support of the kind of program that you're suggesting.
Great. Thanks very much. I'm yielding back 50 seconds.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Carper, too, for your always agreeableness. It's the Ohio State diploma that got you there, I'm sure. Thank you again, and thank you for the discussion in my office, the discussions in the past on trade issues, and especially your USTR interview, or whatever we call these meetings prior to nomination, prior to confirmation. You know about the steel overcapacity issue as one of the country's experts in the steel industry and steel workers. Ohio's lost 4,900 jobs in iron and steel. Last week, we received news that the U.S. Steel plant in Lorain, west of where you grew up on Lake Erie, would permanently idle its number 6 quench and temper facility. Our steel industry, our steel workers suffer because our trading partners don't play by the rules. China's state-owned properties have propped up its steel sector and flooded the global market, including our country, with unfairly made steel. The same is true, as you know, in aluminum. My question is, what does the United States do to get China to implement a net reduction of its steel and aluminum capacity? And if China refuses to reduce its net steel and aluminum capacity, what steps do you take in response?
Senator, first of all, let me thank you for your kind words. I do appreciate that. I'm proud to be from Ohio. I've been to Lorain, to the Lorain facility, absolutely. So I appreciate that. I'm glad that Ashtabula, besides your wife and me, has Urban Meyer. And I'm sure there are other people, but they don't come to mind. My brother, I guess my brother. We have talked a little bit about this issue of Chinese overcapacity in steel and aluminum, and it is something that is troubling to me, not just because of those products, but because it's a model for the Chinese industrial policy. And to some extent, we have sort of 2 models of 2 economic models. One is the one that we want and espouse, and one is a different one, which is one of more state control and state involvement. And in many cases, it's non-economic. What I have said is that we have to have a kind of a comprehensive approach on this. We have to, one, address in the various fora that we have the Chinese overcapacity issue and push back on that. And some of those discussions have possibilities for results. The Global Forum would be a good example. Although personally, I don't think that's going to be the only answer. The second thing is really going to be enforcing our own trade laws. The third thing I suggested is that we get others to enforce their trade laws, all with an effort to make the maintaining of uneconomic capacity and the creation of uneconomic capacity, which is in the state of steel massive. I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of tons of excess capacity, much more than many times the United States total capacity. And then thirdly, I think we have to sit down and have private discussions where we try to think about what other remedies we have. To me, the objective is to make it uneconomic, to make it expensive to do something that adds inefficiency in the market and has such a negative effect on the United States and, quite frankly, steel producers in other parts of the world. So it's a multifaceted approach that I would recommend, but I think part of it is going to be sitting down and deciding whether we need new remedies ourselves and what those remedies would be.
And we'd like to work with you to figure that out. One other question. 2 days after the election, I called my longtime friend Dan D'Amico, who is sitting here, but is also was heading the president's trade team then and for the transition, and talked about TPP and USTR and trade enforcement and renegotiating NAFTA, a whole host of issues, followed up with a letter asking the administration to make it a priority to reset U.S.-China trade relations. First of all, should that be a priority in this administration with you as U.S. trade rep? And second, what steps do you take to make the U.S.-China trade relationship more balanced overall?
Well, first of all, the easy question is, yes, it clearly should be a priority. If you look at our trade deficit as an indicator, not the only indicator, but as an indicator of what's going on in the global economy, China is a good part of our problem, a substantial part of our problem. And I think we have to engage China. We have to talk to China, but I think we also have to think about some new remedies. We have to strongly enforce our trade laws. That probably means self-initiating cases. We've done a pretty good job, I think, in the steel industry under Dan and others' leadership. But I think we have to do it in other products also. And then I think we have to think of more systemic approaches. Some of that may be going to the WTO or taking other actions to engage. I think this president is very focused on this issue. I think his views are on this subject I don't really know his views, but I believe they're very close to yours about in terms of the degree to which this is a problem and how it has to be addressed. So I'm eager to work with this committee and the Ways and Means Committee to find a responsible way to address this problem, this chronic imbalance.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Okay, Senator Carper.
Thanks very much. Welcome. Whatever I pronounce your name, I either want to call you Lighthizer or Budweiser. I just keep
I will tell you
between the two.
I will tell you, Senator, you're not the first person that's had that problem.
Whatever we should call you, we're glad you're here. Thanks, sir. Sounds like your voice isn't as strong as it once was, and we're looking for you to be a strong voice to make sure that American exports make their way into markets all over the world. Senator Brown mentioned that I was an Ohio State graduate, and I was Navy ROTC there, and graduated in '68, right in the middle of the Vietnam War. And, became a naval flight officer, headed to Southeast Asia, and served about 3 tours over there with my compadres before coming home. And I was invited by the president. I actually went back to Vietnam in about a year, about 1991. I went back to Vietnam, led a congressional delegation of all Vietnam veterans to try to find out what happened to thousands of our MIAs and to try to get the truth out of the Vietnamese. And the idea was that if they would actually provide information that provided closure for thousands of American families, we'd move toward normalized relations. They did, and we did. The president asked me to go back with him. President Obama asked me to go back with him last April. Honored to do that. And met with some of the people we actually met with all those years ago in 1991. The president announced when over there that we had decided to sell weapons to the Vietnamese, and so they wouldn't have to rely just on the Chinese and just on the Russians. And the Vietnamese, for themselves, said they'd like to buy a lot of our aircraft. And they wanted to buy, $10, $15 billion worth of aircraft, passenger aircraft, not weaponry. Although they'll probably buy some others that are more defense-related. We have the opportunity to sell a lot of aircraft. Boeing has the opportunity to sell a lot of aircraft to another country that's with whom we've been at odds, and that country is Iran, as you know. And not only does Boeing have an opportunity to sell anywhere from, I've seen as little as $8 billion to as much as $15 billion in product to Iran, commercial aircraft to replace their badly deteriorated civilian airlines. But also Airbus has the opportunity to sell another $10 billion to Iran, and a lot of the components, as you know, for the Airbus products are made in America. So there's, all told, I'm told there's enough aircraft that could be sold between Boeing and Airbus to employ tens of thousands of Americans. And my question of you is this something we ought to allow to happen? My view, quite frankly, as you might tell, is yes. What is yours? As long as they continue to abide by the P5+1 agreement that was struck. Go ahead, thanks.
Well, I was going to say my view is that the way to get rid of trade deficits and move the economy forward is through exports. I mean, exports. I think that is what we're hoping for. In terms of specific sales of airplanes to specific countries, I'm not informed enough about what the administration's policy may be. As a general matter, I strongly agree with you. I think we have to encourage exports. Exports are the key to trade. Exports and enforcement. That's what we have to do. And
thanks. Well, my hope is, if you are confirmed, I suspect you might be, that this is one you'll go to school on. I would urge you to do that, okay? A lot of jobs are involved here, good jobs, as you know. Second thing, you and I were able to talk, and thanks for visiting me in my office several weeks ago when you had a stronger voice.
I did.
But one of the things we talked about was, do we need to renegotiate NAFTA all over again, or can we look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership to see what was done in the context of TPP to renegotiate NAFTA? And my suggestion was that to go to school on what Ambassador Froman and his folks worked on, what they accomplished, and see if maybe we can do a shortcut on NAFTA redo. Your thoughts, please.
I agree completely with you on that. I think Ambassador Froman did a remarkable job in a variety of areas, and that we should take advantage of that work. So I'm in total agreement with you on that.
Good, thank you. If you look, a lot of people, there's a lot of talk these days about building a wall along our border with Mexico. A lot of people think the folks that are coming into the United States are Mexicans. They are not. They're actually more Mexicans, as I think you know. They're going back from the U.S. into Mexico than are coming the other way. NAFTA worked actually pretty well for the Mexicans, I'm told. They have a more vibrant middle class than they did 20 years ago. I think Mexico is now maybe our top customer for American poultry in the whole world. And Canada maybe is among the last, one among the worst. They slap a tariff. I think it's something like 250% tariff on poultry. Takes away a lot of incentive to try Delmarva chicken when you have that kind of tariff. Your thoughts on fixing that kind of imbalance if we have the chance to renegotiate NAFTA?
Well, I hadn't realized they had that high a tariff. I agree that it's something we should look at. I'm sympathetic to anything that has the potential to lead to more U.S. exports. So I'm in agreement with the Senator. I think it's something that when we sit down with Canada, we should raise that and a variety of other subjects which have been raised by various members of the committee during the course of this process.
All right, thanks. Mr. Chairman, am I done? Is my time expired?
Yeah,
Did you want me to ask one more?
I think you've asked quite a bit.
All right, we'll talk maybe talk some more about Vietnam if we could later on. I have in my pocket some Hall's throat lozenges, and as I leave here, I'm going to leave them right beside you. And if they come of some service, you can always thank me in the future when we negotiate on chickens.
I appreciate that.
You better take him up on that. You know that they don't give very often, the Democrats. You know. I take that back. We have a lot of big spenders on this committee. Senator Cassie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I enjoyed our conversation in my office. Now, one thing you mentioned, I think you'll know the numbers, I don't quite know them, is that when we signed NAFTA, we perhaps had a trade surplus of about $5 billion, and now it's a negative $60 billion. I think something along those lines. I mentioned that to someone, and they said and you spoke of the manufacturing jobs that have moved to Mexico. I mentioned that to someone else, and they said, well, the reason some of those car companies moved to Mexico is that Mexico has a trade agreement with both the EU and the United States that allows goods to move back and forth without tariff, that the United States does not. And so for some of these vehicles, if they were produced in the United States, we could not export them to Europe because there would be a tariff upon them. Again, there is not one in Mexico. So as we hopefully move manufacturing back to the United States, which I'm a big fan of, And nonetheless, that does seem as if it is trade policy in Mexico, which is advantaged relative to ours, that is the driver of that, perhaps not another factor. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly think that we have to look at issues like that. I certainly agree with that, Senator. But I suspect that when we do the analysis, the vast majority of the cars that are made by American manufacturers in Mexico will end up right here in the United States.
So the duality of the market is less than it might seem because the lion's share is coming here?
That would be my guess. I haven't studied the issue, but that would be my guess, that the lion's share of the product made in Mexico will end up coming to the United States of automobiles. I think that's their business plan, but I say that without having specifically studied that issue.
As you might guess, there's a lot of existential anxiety among my agricultural producers, and they're afraid that if we modernize the NAFTA Act, or that put it this way, Mexico has made some statements which suggest that they would retaliate if we attempted to push them too far. In the one sense, I understand that there's an international market for commodities, but I gather that products, say, for example, rice, are somewhat advantaged under NAFTA, and so it actually benefits them. So what would you say to my rice farmer who's concerned that there will be retaliation and that they will now be competing against Vietnam, which might have a state-owned enterprise selling rice at a discount relative to what our rice producers can do?
Well, Senator, as we discussed in your office, I hope and believe we can renegotiate NAFTA in a way that helps both countries and doesn't put agriculture in a precarious position. I realize the anxiety and the concern, and I understand it, but I think that there's a general consensus that NAFTA needs revision. It's clearly outdated at this point. And during the course of that negotiation, I think we have to be very careful not to do something that adversely affects those who have been winners during the course of that process.
Let me ask, the energy portfolio or the energy portion of NAFTA is fairly thin. Back then, there wasn't a lot of cross-border energy trade. There's apparently a lot now, both electrons, gas, and oil. Will we just kind of leave that alone, do no harm, or do you have any thoughts in particular about what might be done to work out that to each country's mutual advantage?
Well, I don't have specific thoughts on that point. I would say that anything that encourages trade is a good thing, probably for both countries. And I would say that at this point, we have fairly balanced trade on petroleum generally with Mexico, specifically. So it's part of the agreement. It's something we'll have to focus on. But I don't have specific ideas on negotiating that right now.
By the way, I'll point out that in Louisiana, they're building a lot of LNG export terminals. And I am struck that there's a lot of refiners from elsewhere that are building on the Mississippi using low-cost natural gas to make a value add, which they then export. So a quick win for the administration would be just to expedite the production of those LNG export facilities, multiple benefits, including more jobs here at the wellhead, as well as more construction jobs exporting and more maritime jobs transporting, as well as if they're substituting it for Chinese coal, it actually helps clean up the atmosphere, just to point that out. Lastly, some expressed a concern about Senator Carper mentioned that NAFTA has brought a burgeoning kind of Mexican middle class, which in turn has become a new market, if you will, or a developing market for U.S. goods, including gas, including oil, including you name it, and concerned that if we are too if we're not careful how we do this, that middle class would suffer. The value of the peso, I think, is already falling. Would they continue to be able to afford to buy the goods that we are currently sending? Any thoughts on that, beyond needing to be careful that it doesn't occur?
I think we have to be careful that it doesn't occur.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Senator. Well, what? Oh, Senator Thune.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I know it's been said many times, many ways already at this hearing, and there have been several of my colleagues who have talked about it, but when it comes to agricultural trade, I can't emphasize enough, representing a state where agriculture is our #1 industry, that agriculture trade must be at or near the top of your trade agenda. In terms of today's agricultural climate, we got a lot of producers that are counting on tariff reductions and expanding export markets with existing and new trading partners as the only near-term relief for countering crop and livestock prices that are below production costs. And so there's already been some discussion, including with the senator from Louisiana, about the NAFTA agreement, but Canada and Mexico are very important agricultural trading partners. And I know you didn't want to get into specifics, but I would encourage you, if you can, to get specific on how you intend to improve what is existence under NAFTA. Do you have a time frame? Do you intend to negotiate separately with each of those countries, or are they going to be all part of one agreement? Can you be that specific?
Well, Senator, the decision as to whether it should be trilateral or bilateral really has not been made at this point. I think the administration is very eager to engage quickly on this agreement. There are certain timeframes that are required under TPA, and we're in the process of hopefully doing those consultations. I look forward, if confirmed, to being involved in that process. But there's a whole consultation process and then a time period that's later on top of that. But the administration's stated objective is to do this as quickly as possible. There is uncertainty and anxiety, and sort of minimizing that is in everyone's interest.
This has been covered already by Senator Wyden. He and I teamed up on some digital trade issues, but that was a top negotiating priority for American diplomats under the TPP, and I hope that that will continue to be a very high priority. Coming back to ag for a minute, helping our companies expand their ability to compete and tap into foreign markets, as I said earlier, is very critical. And as those companies make investments in products that can enjoy greater global consumption, it's essential that our competitors not be permitted to plant roadblocks in their way. For instance, in the past few years, the European Union has been using its trade agreements to misuse the concept of geographical indications by erecting de facto non-tariff trade barriers to U.S. products made in South Dakota, such as Parmesan and Asiago cheese. How do you see yourself shaping the United States' approach to foreign policies like this that are intentionally aimed at protecting, or I should say promoting, global rules aimed at choking off competition from U.S. companies around the world?
Well, I'm very familiar with the issue, and it seems to me it's an organized effort on behalf of the European Union, and I think we have to take it head on. We want to discourage other countries from agreeing to these geographic indicators and resist them in the United States. The issue tends to be more what happens in third-party markets. So it's a little more complicated to get into it, but we are aware of it. It'll certainly be something that we'll work on, and we realize it's a serious problem.
We've seen also a disturbing trend in recent years whereby some of our trading partners have ignored their international commitments, particularly with respect to intellectual property protection, either by failing to fully implement agreements or by flouting the rules in order to give their businesses an unfair advantage. These decisions are short-sighted and ultimately discourage innovation, investment, and job growth. What can your agency do to ensure that our trading partners are enforcing existing commitments and to deter countries from weakening such standards in their own IP regimes?
Well, we talked a little bit about intellectual property protection, and it will be a priority of USTR if I'm confirmed. I realize how important it is, and intellectual property theft, weak enforcement of patent protection, and the like are very serious impediments to adding efficiency and helping U.S. trade.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's all I have. I appreciate your time, Mr. Lighthizer, and again, can't emphasize enough the importance of agriculture, and as you start looking at these, what we're going to do in the place of TPP and how you're going to approach NAFTA, I hope you'll keep that a very, very high priority.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you, Senator. Senator.
I think.
I think he's next.
Senator Bennett,
Senator Bennett is next, and then Senator Cantwell. Wonderful. Senator Cantwell, we appreciate you doing that.
Thank you, Senator Bennett. Mr. Lighthizer, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your nomination. Since I know that you're a former, well familiar with this committee, I can throw a lot at you at once if I could. So thank you. One, I want to know whether you support the Export-Import Bank and the concept of credit agency for the United States, and whether the president should immediately appoint people to get it functioning at the level it should. Number two, will you be aggressive in getting the Europeans to stop massively subsidizing Airbus? You know that the WTO has found that the aerospace sector, $17 billion of illegal subsidies. That brings the total of illegal European subsidies to Airbus to about $22 billion. So I want to know if you're going to be aggressive on that. Our colleagues here in the Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act included an authorization for $15 million in trade enforcement trust funds, and that was about making sure that we had ample support within USTR to actually fight for trade enforcement. I believe in an economy outside the United States selling U.S. products. In fact, I was very happy the last administration had a goal of doubling exports, but I know that we also need to have the personnel. So do you support the Trade Enforcement Trust Fund, and what should its annual appropriations be so that we are adequately staffed? And if I could, just one last theoretical question. I've met Mr. Navarro. I've heard Secretary Ross talk about trade, and then there's your position. Who's going to be in charge of trade?
Thank you, Senator. That about covers all my talking points.
They said, I heard what Senator Dole said, very talented, so I'm sure you're up to the task.
Well, he's kind. I would say, first of all, in terms of, just sort of start from the bottom, perhaps, in terms of the relationship between the White House, the Commerce Department, and USTR, I fully expect to have the full statutory authority that the Congress provides. And I fully expect to work in a collaborative way with Secretary Ross, who I admire and I think is very, very talented in this area, and the White House. Now, the White House is defined as Peter Navarro and other people. I mean, there's Gary Cohen and others. In all my experience with one administration after another, there are almost always sort of three sources of kind of influence in the trade policy, and the job of the USTR really is historically to sort of sort it out. That's why.
So you're the lead in sorting that out, more or less.
Just sort of, that's correct. I mean, historically, that's why John Kennedy started the agency, along with the Senate Finance Committee, the Ways and Means Committee in 1962. So I expect it to work the way it has. I expect it to be very collaborative, and I look forward to working with all the parties on that, and particularly with working with this committee and with the Ways and Means Committee. In terms of the trust fund, yes, I hope the appropriations, I hope the $15 million is appropriated. In terms of resources generally, I'm not now in the administration, so I can say that yes, we need more resources for sure.
Thank you.
The agenda is substantial.
Some of my colleagues wanted it mandatory. I just want us to put the money there. I want to have more people in trade enforcement than are sitting in this dais. And right now we don't have a lot. So I'm glad you're committing to 15. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. In terms of Airbus subsidies, yes, I will be aggressive. I realize that's a problem. I've followed the issue for a long time. I've never really litigated or been involved with it, but it's a serious problem. It's one that's gone on and on and on, and it has a real impact on American manufacturing. In terms of the Ex-Im Bank, at this point, I'm awaiting instructions. I appreciate the importance of the Ex-Im Bank to Boeing and to other companies and to U.S. exports. Having said that, that's one of those issues that there's strong views on both sides, and I expect to do what the president instructs me to do when he instructs me to do it.
So you don't think, as part of our trade agenda, that you think we can be successful without an aggressive credit agency approach by the U.S.?
I think we have to do everything we can to encourage exports. Having said that, the Export-Import Bank is a sensitive issue, and it's not an issue that I worked in personally.
Can you just define sensitive, since I'm running out of time?
Well, I think I define sensitive as people who are strongly for it and people who are strongly against it. And normally in those cases, when I'm not informed and realize that the administration will make a policy, I'm probably better off waiting for the administration to make a policy.
I would just say that there is a very small group who's politically motivated and maybe loud, but when you allow the United States Senate to vote on it, both majorities in the House and Senate have supported it, and majorities of Republicans have supported it. So the notion that somehow it doesn't have major support, it's more just being held hostage by some political agenda. So I hope you'll be loud about this as a credit agency strategy, because to me, we will lose U.S. manufacturing. If Boeing can put Rolls-Royce engines on a plane and get credit financing in Europe, how's that helping GE? And so while other agencies on an international basis are going to be aggressive about this, we need to get the right strategy here, and it can be a discussion about how we make sure that we're not doing anything to distort the market. But I think the administration's got to get realistic. You can't go stand in front of a Boeing plane in South Carolina and then not have a functioning export-import bank. So I hope we can get there.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you and the ranking member for having this hearing. Thank you, Mr. Lighthizer. It's nice to see you again. I just want to underscore what the senator from Washington ended with, and I think you'll find that her diagnosis or description of the politics around this is probably dead on. I also want to say, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to working with you and the ranking member to figure out a bipartisan way through this waiver process that's needed. And want to also mention, but I know you've covered this ground, and I know I'm the last one, and I'm sure you're ready to be done, so I won't ask you a question about steel, but I do want to just observe, as my colleagues have, that overcapacity from countries like China and others is hurting our industry, including Evraz in Pueblo, Colorado. So we talked about this a little bit when you were in my office. I know what your answer is, and I appreciate it and look forward to working with you to make real changes that are going to benefit our steel workers and our steel industry in this country. I wanted just to get one question in on NAFTA before you go. As you know, and you've talked about today, the administration throughout the campaign signaled that it intended to renegotiate NAFTA. This is very important to my state. Mexico is the second largest export market for the state of Colorado, and it's particularly interesting and important to my farmers and ranchers. Colorado's agriculture community depends heavily on exports to NAFTA countries. For example, last year, Colorado exported more than $486 million in beef, pork, and lamb to Canada and Mexico. Canada and Mexico alone accounted for a third of Colorado's beef exports. Agricultural producers in Colorado are worried. They're interested and curious about this reopening, but they're worried that opening up NAFTA will lead Mexico to Canada to impose higher tariffs and that the flow of goods will be physically stalled by the negotiations. They're also worried that negotiating NAFTA will limit important market access that the United States currently enjoys, notwithstanding the political conversation that we have had in this country. And I wonder if you could just finish today by responding to that a little bit, and also talking as you did, or distinguishing as you did when we met in my office, between your views and the President's views on the manufacturing side of things with respect to trade, and your views and his views with respect to the importance of trade for agriculture in this country. Okay, well then just speak for yourself.
I think that we have to do something for manufacturing. We have a huge manufacturing trade deficit, and I think we have to do something. And there are a variety of things in the NAFTA framework that need updating, and I think those things will tend to help manufacturing. And then your position, which I think is equally valid, is that agriculture has done pretty well under NAFTA, and that's true in a variety of different agricultural products. And we have to be careful not to lose what we gained, and that is a balance. I think something has to be done. I think we can actually accomplish that. I think we are very important to Mexico also. And I realize they have other options, but a huge percentage of their of their exports come to the United States. So I think we do have leverage. And with that leverage, I think if we do it properly and rationally, we can improve NAFTA for both countries and also not hurt agriculture. And that certainly would be my objective. And I know it's the objective of an awful lot of members of this committee and a lot of members of the Ways and Means Committee and others in Congress. So I subscribe to that view. I do believe it can be done. I mean, I'm not suggesting that I think it will be easy, but I do believe it can be done. The United States and Mexico both need each other economically a lot. And having an agreement that's 20-some years out of date, it doesn't even have a digital chapter in it because there was no need for that in those days. I think that's something that we can do in a way that helps both of us and doesn't risk damage to our agricultural sector, which is also very, very important.
I appreciate that answer. I'd say that even in the act of negotiation, we're going to have to take care to make sure that the current markets continue to be open in the way that they have been, and I know you appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back the balance of my time. Thank you for the hearing.
Thank you, Senator. My partner on the committee has one more question to ask Senator White.
Let me, if I might, go into this resources for enforcement issue just a little bit deeper. Mr. Lighthizer, isn't cutting enforcement resources an invitation to foreigners to cheat our workers and businesses? It seems like a simple question.
But it seems like a kind of a trap question, doesn't it, somehow?
It relates,
You think?
It relates to the second question.
I'm just asking myself, if it's a trap, I should probably think about it.
Well, it is a substantive question because it relates to the real world. We keep battling for these resources. I've already told you, I've very much enjoyed our conversation. I think you have a lot of talent. But I'd like an answer to the question because it relates to what's ahead.
Senator, I think USTR needs more resources.
Good. If there are fewer resources for trade enforcement in the president's budget, which is about to come out, how do you go about addressing the challenges we've spent like close to 3 hours talking about?
Well, Senator, we're going to do the best that we can with what we have. I'm not in the administration. I wish I was. If I were in the administration, I would be in there lobbying right now for more resources for USTR. I'm not in the administration, so I really can't get into that. My view, publicly stated, is that we need more resources for USTR, and with whatever we have, we'll do the best job we can do.
I think that, again, the point is these are questions that bump up against the realities that senators are talking about. For example, one of the things I was struck by, I think we talked about it in the office, that on this question of finally getting a fair shake for our timber workers and our mills, we've got a situation where the hiring freeze is making it very hard for them to get all the data that they need in the provinces of Canada. So I'm just going to operate under the assumption that you are going to fight with all of your energy and considerable talent to make sure you get the resources, and we'll leave that there. Since it's the end of the hearing, I just come back to this point that in my state, 1 out of 5 jobs revolves around international trade. And I think the premier economic issue of our time is how we get wages up for people. How do we increase wages? And so many of the trade jobs have that added value, added component. They reflect a higher level of productivity because we're trying to get the products into tough global markets. So I think to have you, as you said today, indicate you'll be part of a full court press on enforcement, and that you'll play offense in terms of creating opportunities for our companies and our workers overseas is an appropriate way to end this. Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent request to put 2 documents in with respect to this disclosure issue. We have a bipartisan disclosure memo on the nominee that has been done by the committee, and then I would like to enter into the record, ask unanimous consent to enter into the record an agreement between Mr. Lighthizer and the government of Brazil, in which he represented the Sugar and Alcohol
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Lighthizer. We look forward to continuing the conversation in the days ahead, and we thank you for your time today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I just want to thank all my colleagues who attended today and participated today. Most especially, I want to thank you, Mr. Lighthizer. You've been a light around here for many years, and we appreciate all the work that you did while you were here, working with Senator Dole and others, and all the work you've done since. But thank you for your appearance here today, and most of all, for your willingness to again serve our country in this important position. I personally think it's terrific for you to be willing to get into this and to give your life to it, and it just means a lot to me. Before I adjourn, I just want to note that we'll have the customary quick turnaround time for written questions for cabinet level nominations. I'll ask senators to submit all of their questions by 6 p.m. tomorrow evening. And with that, the committee will be in recess.